Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel and welcome if you're new, and I would love it if you would stick around and subscribe. So for today's video, I'm going to be doing my October wrap up, and in the month of October I read 15 books, but 10 of them were audiobooks and 3 of them were graphic novels. So especially listening to audiobooks is something that I find is really helpful for me to still be able to read the books that I want to read while in grad school, because I can listen to them while I'm doing like monotonous work or getting ready in the morning. That's why I've listened to so many audiobooks. So I'm doing my wrap-ups in order from like least favorite to most favorite of the month. So this is not the order that I read them in, it's just the order that I prefer them in. And I did write them in my journal in the order that I read them in. So if it seems like I'm flipping around a lot or something, that's why, because they're not in order. So the first book that I read was We Were Liars by E. Lockhart, and I listened to this book on audiobook and I gave it 2 stars. I really did not enjoy this book. It was my least favorite of the month, since that's what we're starting off with. And We Were Liars, man, I don't even remember enough of it at this point to even like give an adequate description, and I don't like have the physical copy to read anything, but it's basically about this girl, and she and her family like go back to this, like, it seemed like a vacation place once a year, but then something like mysterious had happened, so they didn't go back like the year before, but they're finally going back this year. So yeah, that's the gist of it. To me, this story just felt really disjointed. Like, just different aspects of the story were just like all over the place and didn't really tie together very nicely, in my opinion. And quite frankly, a lot of it was just really boring to me. So it was like, it didn't really make sense, and then it was really boring. And also just like the ending in general, I had seen a lot of people on Goodreads say that like either they gave it like a high rating and said like the ending was great, or they gave it like a medium rating and said that their rating would have been lower if it weren't for the ending, like the ending redeemed something for them. But to me, the ending just kind of, it was whatever. Like the different strings and like parts of the story didn't really tie together well, in my opinion. And also, yeah, like I couldn't tell how we got from point A to point B, and like the ending just like, sure, it was surprising, but it was surprising because it wouldn't have made sense. I was also like not impressed with the characters. I just thought that they felt really flat, and they didn't really like, I felt like they really didn't even develop that much by the end of the story. So yeah, that was We Were Liars. Not a big fan, but that's okay. Moving on. The next book that I read was Strange Grace by Tessa Gratton, which I also listened to on audiobook, and I gave this book 3 stars. This book, like, it wasn't like We Were Liars where it didn't just like make sense, but it was boring. Like, I felt like nothing happened in this book of note, and trying to describe it, basically in this world there's a slaughter moon every 7 years, but the slaughter moon is happening early this year than it's supposed to be, so it's like after 3 years or something like that instead of 7. And then like these 3 characters go into the woods to try to like figure out what's going on. That's the best I can do. But yeah, I just felt like really bored throughout reading this, and like nothing important was happening, and like I had seen like reviews and everything saying that it was really dark, but it was not as dark as I was expecting. I was just kind of like very underwhelmed. And I may actually like at some point reread this physically because I feel like with this one, I may have enjoyed this more reading it physically than on audiobook. So that's something I'm going to keep in mind, and maybe something that you would like to know. So yeah, that was this one. Just, it wasn't bad, it just really underwhelming for me. So the next book that I have for this wrap up is The Coldest Girl in Coldtown by Holly Black, which I also listened to on audiobook, and I also gave this book 3 stars, but I did like it a little bit more than Strange Grace. So this book is about, it's kind of like in our real world, but the vampires are like real and out, where like literally everybody knows about them, and there are these cold towns for vampires and for just like people who are like turning or might be infected. So our main character wakes up at a party and there's like this vampire and one of her friends, and so then they just go to a cold town. And honestly, this book was just kind of like, it wasn't awful. It was like a similar situation to Strange Grace, where it wasn't like awful. I was just like a bit bored and like, what's the point of this story? And I didn't really connect with the characters, and a lot of them honestly kind of got on my nerves. So yeah, I wasn't expecting to love this book, but I was hoping to like it a little bit more than I did, but that's okay. And also, I'm sorry if these synopsises or these reviews are really short, but I have like 15 books to get through and I don't want this video to be like extremely long, so that's why. The 4th book I have for this wrap up is The One by Kiera Cass, and I listened to this book on audiobook as well. Yeah, I listened to a lot of audiobooks this month. But I gave it 3.5 stars, and this is the 3rd book in the Selection series by Kiera Cass. And if you've seen my other wrap-ups, actually I don't know if I talked about the first one, but I know for sure I talked about The Elite. If you've seen that, you know how I felt about that one. So I will say that I did like The One better than The Elite, so there's that. But the Selection series is about this dystopian world where the United States is a monarchy now, and the new prince, there's basically this like almost like a reality TV show like The Bachelor, where there are selected girls throughout the realm, I guess, who are selected, and they go to the palace to compete to win the prince's heart. So yeah, this is the 3rd book in that series, and I think it's also the conclusion in the like original trilogy, so I'm not sure if I'm going to continue on with the series or not. I may not, I'm just not sure. But yeah, as I said before, I did like The One better than The Elite. I liked The One about as much as the Selection, and the main reason I did not like The Elite as much as the other one is because she felt like because America, the main character, felt like super annoying, and I definitely do go more into depth about why she was so annoying in my September wrap up. So, which that will be linked in the cards, which I'm not sure which side of the screen that will be on, so I'm not even gonna try pointing. But yeah, America was still annoying in this book, but just less so than in The Elite. And overall, I felt like this book was a good conclusion. Like, I felt like the ends were kind of like wrapped up, but it did drag at the beginning, so that's where I feel like most of the star deductions are coming from. I'm not even like a third of the way through these books, and I'm already 12 minutes into this video. Why do I hate myself? Okay, so the 5th book that I read this month was The Beast is an Animal by Peternell Van Arsdale, and I always can't pronounce this book, so I also listened to this book on audiobook and gave it 3.5 stars. In this world, there are these soul eaters who live in the forest, and when Alice, the main character, was a kid, she saw these soul eaters, and yeah, and so basically after like an event happens in the village that Alice lives in, they have to move to another village, and in this village the people are just very like afraid of the soul eaters and also very, very pious. So anything to do with like sins, that kind of thing, are always tied to the soul eaters. And since Alice did see the soul eaters when she was a kid, she's kind of like almost ostracized in a way for that. So I definitely thought that was interesting commentary on just like religion. Yeah, this book still was like a bit underwhelming. Like I feel like this is another one where I might enjoy it more physically reading it because I can get more of the atmosphere just like in my head. And there were some points in this book where I like really enjoyed it, but then some points where I felt like it dragged. So yeah, that's why it's like a 3.5 stars. So the 6th book that I have for my wrap up is Bone Gap by Laura Ruby, which I also read on audiobook. And I swear we're gonna have something in here that's not an audiobook. 2 books from now we'll have something that's not an audiobook. So Bone Gap, I listened to it on audiobook and I gave it 4 stars. I really wound up really liking the villain, not as a person but just as a villain. I thought he was a really good villain. He was very like creepy but also kind of realistic in a way. But Bone Gap is a magical realism story about this town in Illinois called Bone Gap, and the main character Finn and his brother, and then this girl from the village who's kind of like was dating Finn's brother Sean goes missing. So it's kind of about the town and like their feelings about it, and also kind of about Finn trying to save Rosa. So the first half of this book was really boring because a lot of this was about like the town like almost like blaming Finn and everything, so nothing really happened for the first half of the book approximately. But then once it started picking up in the second half, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I gave it a 4 stars. And I also really enjoyed Finn and Sean and another character in the story named Petey. I really liked all of them. So the next book that I have for my wrap up is Uglies by Scott Westerfeld. And this is like one of those YA dystopians that were like really popular when I was like a kid, and my parents were kind of like really strict on like what we could read and watch and that kind of thing, so I wasn't allowed to read this, even though I saw it in the bookstore and I was always really intrigued. So now that I'm an adult, I read it now. I also listened to this book on audiobook, and this book is basically just a dystopian world where everybody starts off ugly, and then when they turn 16 they undergo an operation to become pretty. But it's not even necessarily like our societal views of what's pretty, it's just kind of like more of a uniformity thing. Yeah, but then so Tally is the main character and she really wants to become pretty, but then she meets her friend Shay who doesn't want to be pretty, and then they discover this like just other society that doesn't, it kind of like rebels against the whole like pretty operation. So none of them, I won't say none of them, but like most of them don't get the operation. This was really interesting. The world really interested me, and also like the science, there was like they talked about the science a little bit, or like what happens in the brain with a pretty operation, so I really enjoyed that too. And I also really enjoyed the characters, like Tally and Shay, and their like dynamic. And there was this one character in here named David. I really enjoyed him too. But there was something missing for me from this book. I'm not quite sure what it was, but overall I really enjoyed it. This wrap up is going to be so freaking long. So the next book that I have for this wrap up is Tunnel of Bones by Victoria Schwab. And first of all, I love the cover. It's very nice. And this book I read physically. It's the first one of this wrap up that I did not read on audiobook. And I gave this book 4.5 stars. This book is the second book in the Cassidy Blake series, I think is what it's called. The first book being City of Ghosts. But Tunnel of Bones I really enjoyed. I love Cassidy, her character, and then her best friend Jacob as a character. So City of Bones is the first one in the series, and it's about this girl, Cassidy Blake, whose best friend is a ghost. And since Cassidy nearly drowned, she can now actually see ghosts. And her parents are actually like not ghost hunters, but they're starting a TV show about ghosts in Edinburgh. So her and her family actually go there in the first book, and then in this book they go to Paris. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really cute. I just enjoyed the story and the setting, and like I said before, the characters. So the next book that I read was Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, and we're back to audiobooks because I did listen to this book on audiobook. And this is basically about these twins, Kath and Rin. Catherine. Haha, very funny. But they go to college, and it centers around Kath because she's very like dependent on her sister, but her sister wants to be independent. So it's kind of about like Kath dealing with that and also just adjusting to college life. And yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. I really like Levi, the character in here. Like, he just made me so happy. It was just really cute. So the next book that I have is actually moving into my 5-star books. So I did have 6 5-star books this month, which I'm not like the harshest rater, so take that as you will. But anyways, that book will be Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell and Faith Erin Hicks. This is a graphic novel, so I did read this physically. Yeah, I really enjoyed this book. It's super cute. It was great for fall time, like the art style also just like gives me fall vibes because it's like goes from like, let me find, like oranges on the page to like purples. So yeah, and the art style definitely seems very fall, and it takes place at a pumpkin patch. And basically Josiah, the guy, has a crush on this girl, and he's had a crush on her since they started working at the pumpkin patch. And then his friend, I forgot her name, it's not Josiah, it's Josie, and then her name is Deja. So yeah, Deja encourages Josie to go like track down this girl in the pumpkin patch and basically ask her out. So yeah, like I said before, I love the art style of this book, and it definitely gives me fall vibes. It's super cute. And I also just really enjoyed this is a map of the pumpkin patch, and they have like all these different fall things throughout the book, like the pumpkin bomb stand, a corn maze, the succotash hut, the s'mores pit. So I really enjoyed all of that about this book. And this is definitely a book that I'm going to want to reread every fall. I meant to reread it on Halloween because I had read it earlier in October, but it just did not happen. The next book that I have on this list, we are 2/3 of the way through now, and my footage is up to nearly 27 minutes, so love that for me. I'm gonna have so much fun editing this. The 11th book on my wrap up is Mooncakes by Wendy Zhu and Suzanne Walker, and this book was also so cute. It's another graphic novel. This book is about this witch Nova and this werewolf Tam. And then in the woods, there's this like horse demon, and they basically have to delete it, and there's also like a romance aspect. This book I also gave 5 stars. It was so freaking adorable, and I love the art style too. And the story was great, and it also has non-binary representation because Tam is non-binary. I keep saying that weird, but there's also, okay, I found it. There's also this one place in the book where one of Nova's grandmothers actually like misgenders Tam, and then Tam corrects the grandma and like to say I go by they instead of she, and then the grandma is just like, oh no, my mistake, I'm sorry. And I just thought that was really great that that was in there, because it shows that, like, for one thing, like, we can't assume people's genders, and it also just shows that, like, if you do mess up, you just apologize and move on and correct yourself instead of trying to be a butt about it. So yeah, I also really enjoyed that aspect, but I also loved the romance and the story and the characters, and it was just so cute. Oh, this is another one I'm gonna want to reread every fall. It's just like super cozy. And so the next book that I have is the last graphic novel that I have for this wrap up, and that book is Welcome to Lovecraft, which is the first volume in Lock and Key, which is a graphic novel series. So it's another graphic novel, and this book is basically about these kids. Their dad is like murdered, and so then they have to move to this like creepy house. It has all these different like magical doors, and the doors do like different things. So it's basically just about these kids, like, for one thing, trying to cope with their dad's murder, and for another thing, there's like a whole other like aspect with the villains, which I thought this was really interesting. And yeah, I gave this book 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. Like, I wouldn't say I loved the art style as much as, say, like Pumpkinheads and Mooncakes, but I enjoyed the story more, even though I really like those two too, and the art style in this one is still good. I just really thought that this was super interesting and creepy. There's like the real person villain and then like a supernatural villain, so that was super interesting. Yeah, and I can't wait to read the rest of the series. So the next book on this wrap up is actually The Diviners by Libba Bray, and the 14th is Layer of Dreams by Libba Bray, and I just thought, since these are in the same series, I would talk about them together. I absolutely love this series, and I did like Layer of Dreams a little bit more, so I'm going to talk about The Diviners first and then Layer of Dreams. I did listen to both of these on audiobook, if I didn't say that already. So The Diviners is about this girl, Evie O'Neill, who was living in a small town, like Ohio town, and she's just kind of like, she gets into a little bit of trouble in Ohio, so her parents ship her off to New York City to live with her uncle at the Museum for Creepy Crawlies, which I think I've mentioned this before, but sending your kid to New York doesn't seem like a good idea if you're trying to get them to calm down some, but that's besides the point. But anyways, yeah, I gave this book 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I loved like the 1920s setting and the like atmosphere of like the creepiness. Oh, and I also, in the synopsis, I forgot to say that like people are starting to develop these like supernatural powers throughout the book, and those people are called diviners, and there's also some like ghosty happenings going on. So I gave this book 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I loved the like setting and the atmosphere and the characters, and literally I love this book so much. And Layer of Dreams, I love this book even a little bit more than the diviners. I thought it did a really nice job of expanding on the whole diviner situation, like how the government plays a role in that, so that was really interesting. And I thought the villain was even more interesting in this book, because like in the first book the villain was just this kind of like, he was really creepy, but he was just like more cliche. But like the villain in this one, I thought she was almost like creepier in a way. Yeah, I just really enjoyed this book and how it expanded on the story. It definitely deals with like racism and homophobia, so if that's something hard for you to read, I would take that into consideration. And also, I guess like death of a loved one, which I don't really want to go into depth because I feel like it might ruin some of the story, but if that's something you would want to know about, I would try to look more into that. And the ending of this book, it felt like really ominous for like how the rest of the series is going to go down, so I am so ready to read the rest of the series. And finally, the last book that I had for this wrap up is Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, which of course I gave this book 5 stars. I love Harry Potter so much. This is the other book that I physically read this month, and I gave this book 5 stars. And I love that like how things start to come together in this book, because I feel like there have been like some like, not loose ends, but like different strings, I guess, that are starting to come together in this book to lead up to like the conclusion, which I'm hopefully gonna read in December or January. So I also love the characters, of course, and my Goodreads review when I finished this book was, I am emotional, but like with like every word alternating between uppercase and lowercase. So I think that accurately sums up how I feel about this. So yeah, that is all of the books that I read in October. I know it's a lot, so if you stuck around to this point, I am very proud, because I know this video is going to be really long. The footage is already at over 38 minutes, so editing is going to suck. So if you stayed to this point, I'm very proud of you, and thank you so much for sticking around. And that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon in my next video. Bye!